All right, everybody, welcome back to the best hour of their day. Fern here, a good buddy of mine, Mr. Brandon Price
What's up,
from
man?
Ashburn CrossFit up in the Northern Virginia area. And so for the listeners, this is a little bit unique. So Brandon probably falls in the bucket of most of you guys where he is a coach that I've been working with for a couple of years at this point on coach development. So I did his level 1 and level 2. No,
Just the level 1.
Yeah, just level 1. I did not do your level 2. But then we'll talk a little bit about Brandon and some things that we've worked with him with over the course of the past, what's it been, like 18 months, 2 years?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think the first time I came down there was like February 2018. It was right before the Open came into it.
Okay, cool. But so a lot of this is going to be kind of things that Brandon has learned along the way as a developing coach. He is a level 2 coach working on the level 3, and things that we've worked on him with, lessons learned, what his experience was. He's going to get to ask me some questions. So I think you guys will enjoy it because a lot of people have questions like, well, hey, like what's the experience like to have a mentor as a coach? And we're just going to get it right from the horse's mouth right now. So I have no idea if he's going to say anything good or not. We will.
Mostly good stuff.
We will find out. He could be like, you bro.
Yeah.
Cool. But real quick, Brandon, give everybody a little bit of your background. Give them like the standard bumper sticker, how I found CrossFit story.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So I used to work in sports management. Lifting was, been a part of my life for like the last 6 years or so. And honestly, I just wanted to look good when I looked at myself in the mirror, like after I got out of the shower, right? There was nothing sexy about the programming that I was doing. It was a bunch of bicep curls and bench pressing and all that. Nothing wrong with that. And then it was in December of like 2016. I had a day off and I was just like looking for something to watch on Netflix and stumbled across Fittest on Earth of 2015. Saw that, was like, that looks pretty freaking cool. And, got on a Google search, was like, let's go find this CrossFit thing. Found a gym in the Grand Rapids area. I'm originally from Michigan. And that's where that began. And then, at the time, like I said, I was working in sports management and I was going through, I didn't like my job at all, was really unhappy about that. And I really enjoyed fitness. I liked learning about it. It was an opportunity to help people, which is really close to my heart. And when I found CrossFit and saw the community like aspect to everything, where when you went in for a class and you got to put your phone down for an entire hour and just interact with people and be with people, I was really drawn to that. And it was probably like January 2016 where I was like, okay, how do I figure out how to do this like as a career? That's where that started. I ended up moving down to the Virginia area in like March of 2017, just because Michigan is wicked cold. It's like 5 months of winter, like bunch of, 25 degrees below zero, like into February. And moved to Virginia, called like 12 different CrossFit gyms. And I was just like, hey, I don't have an L1 currently, but I would like to be a part of your gym some way, somehow. And I was like, I'll even start by like cleaning out a storage unit, but I would like to be on staff and one day to be coaching. And there was only one guy who called me back. His name's Lee. You've met him. He's been on the podcast with us. And he gave me an opportunity to do that. And that was 2.5 years ago. Never looked back ever since. And then June 2017 took the L1. And that's where I met you. That's where our story began, man.
And that was in Reston, correct?
That wasn't Reston. Yeah,
I was at Maggie's gym. So it's funny that story, because this falls perfectly in line with a couple different things that have come up on the podcast recently, which is the first one, which is, how to interact or how to seek out. We talked about on the compensation episode with like, how should that work with regard to like trying to work in a gym? And, you went the old school, just guerrilla marketing tactic, which is like, I'm just going to call people and show up. And
yeah.
So talk a little bit more about that, because so you called Lee, he called you back, and then what happened? Because this is where people get a little, nobody knows like what the details were. It's just like, okay, so Lee calls you back, and then what was the deal that you guys struck such that you are now the GM of CrossFit or Ashburn CrossFit?
Yeah, it's funny. I listened to that compensation episode like a couple hours ago. So it's funny you mentioned that. And that's a really good question. So initially when I was going into this, like, doing personal training, CrossFit training, I knew it was going to be a part-time gig, but I wanted to be paid. I was providing a service, right? Ultimately. And so I was looking for a gym that was going to do that. Now I was making phone calls to these gyms while I was still in Michigan. I was like, hey dude, I'm going to be moving there. Like April 1 was my target date, but I really didn't know. I hadn't like put in my notice for my other job yet. But I gave him a call and he's like, yeah, man, like when you move down here, give me a call and we'll just set something up and we'll just talk and see where like next steps can go. Right. And so I ended up moving down there. It was like middle of April. I gave him another call and he's like, that first Monday, I think I got there on a Saturday, and that first Monday went in, it was like 10 a.m. and it was just it was a pretty informal talk, but like Lee is, he's one of the most, significant people I've ever met in my life. But like that 10-minute conversation, I was like, based on what his values were, like, the direction that I could go and get compensated for, I was like, it's going to be impossible not to want to work for this guy. Right. So I had a couple other like opportunities, like to do some personal training at like a Gold's gym, which, that's fine. If I needed to start there, I would have. But
real quick. So stay there for a second, because this is relevant. Did you get into, so let's talk about that, because I think this is relevant to the whole conversation in general. Do you remember any of the specifics with regard to Gold's Gym? And can you talk about what the compensation looked like there?
Oh man. Yeah. A little bit anyway. So that conversation, that was going to be a lot more full-time. And that was basically pure sales is what it was going to end up being. So, I mean, that was going to be something where
was it commission based?
It was all commission based. So you're just selling packages, which I'm not totally against, but my other job that I was currently working was also commission based. So I wanted something that was going to be like, I had some sort of income where I knew I could like pay bills and everything. Right. So the guy shows me the spreadsheet, and he was a nice dude. And he shows me this, this spick and span, like spreadsheet of like a master trainer who could make like $100,000. And that was after so many hours and, getting like reoccurring revenue and everything. But it was pretty much, you were pretty much going to live like on the floor, just talking to people, interacting with them a little bit, and then maybe asking them questions like, would you want to work with me in a free trial class? And then you try to sell them into a 10 class, 20 class, whatever that was going to be, packages from there. And then besides that, you were pretty much going to be living on the phone as far as that goes, which in the personal training world is not uncommon. It's not for everybody, but like it was pure commission based as far as that was going to go. And it was going to be a lot more hours than I was really available to put into that time.
Do you remember what the percentage take on that was? Like as far as personal training goes, was it a sliding scale?
Man, I really can't remember, to be honest with you, Jason.
Yeah. Most of them, it's not very good. Like most of them, it's like well below 50%, like in the 30-ish%.
Yeah. And you talk about like the typical CrossFit split's going to be, Chris Cooper's like 55-45 or 50-50 if you get really lucky.
And I think that model, I think it is rapidly, I think it has a lot of validity. I'm not married to it. I think a lot of it has to do with the person, right? So I think the most traditional big box gyms are much lower percentage, but you can make money other ways. So like you're on the phone call and they're paying you like hourly rate for doing administrative work. But the personal training rates are generally not very good. I think Coop and 4/9, like that falls in the middle. And as far as compensation goes, I think that is an evolving thing depending on where the business is and where the trainer is, right? So I definitely think there's a good chunk of people that fall in the category that should take home more than 4/9, right? Because they're that good and they're bringing in that much benefit to the business.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, and then on the other end where, Sean Pastuch, like he's just like, hey, you should give them way more than that. And there's a lot of gym owners that get freaked out about that because that's a ton of money. So I definitely think it's like, hey, figure out which model works best for you. Try to bring in the best people and evolve the model just like you evolve your training, your coaching, and everything else. But I think the big takeaway is they understand all of the models and where and how they can be effective. But I was just curious what that was for you when you started. But yeah, it's a lot of like salesy phone calls, which is not for the faint of heart.
Well, and it's also like, it's not like it's a cold call. Like, I mean, you're calling people for the most part at a bigger gym who probably don't go to the gym. But yeah, it's just not for everybody. I would encourage people to go do that. I think it's a great experience and will help you tremendously in life. But again, not for everybody.
I have done it and probably doing a whole nother episode on this, but like the difference between warm and cold sales.
It's so different, dude.
Like I don't even consider warm sales a skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to try. The only thing you have to try to do is to not mess it up.
I mean, you literally just, at that point, you just ask a question is like, how do I get you to join the gym? Like,
Yeah. The question is
let them talk first and you should be good to go.
Yeah. For warm sales, which is most CrossFit gyms, like the only question you're going to have to ask is like, how can we help you? And then what form of payment would you like to use?
That's literally it. Can you sign up today? Go grab your payment. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah.
Like cold sales is so much different. You have to learn objections. You have to learn to be rejected and be okay with that. Like it can be like a lonely ass job, man.
It can be brutal, but dude, and I think it helps you out in other aspects of life as well. Just because like being okay, like in conflict all the time, I think is so beneficial. And honestly, like moving on from being told no, like especially as a business owner, if you're running a business, like you're going to hear that way more often. You're going to hear yes for stuff, and I think I think it's something people should do, but again, it's not for everybody.
It is definitely not for everybody. It is not easy to deal with, even for somebody who's super confident, like, cause you're going to get like in the cold call world. I mean, it's like you're crushing it at 25% close, crushing it.
That's incredible. 25% is
25% is incredible. So imagine that you have to make 100 phone calls and 90 of them are for sure going to tell you to pound sand, like, in probably not a nice way. Like that wears on you after a while. And it makes coming back to doing warm sales like so refreshing. You're like, oh, you want to be here? This is fantastic. Let's sign you up. So, but no, I agree with you. I think everybody should do it because it does provide perspective, and you do develop some skill sets there, which is like navigating objections and understanding, like the art of sales, because there is an art to it. So, but anyway,
100%, man.
I was just curious about that. So you take your level 1, you go to a CrossFit Reston, and then how long was it before you reached back out to me?
It was a while. So I reached out to everybody at the L. I mean, you go to the L1 and you're just like on fire. You're just like, I mean, it was still one of the best weekends of my life, but I connected with all you guys like right after. And then I wanted to give myself like, it was probably a good 6 months to coach and just get some reps underneath my belt, just because like I'm brand new. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I have, certification through the National Academy of, sports medicine in the L1, but as far as like practical, that doesn't mean shit. Right. So I wanted to give myself a little bit of time, and then I started reaching out to people. It was probably right around the turn of the year or so.
Who did you call first?
So I reached out to you and Mel first, and both of you
which
guys.
Which one was first? This is important, bro.
Oh, this is really important. I'm not gonna lie to you, man. It was Melody.
That's fucked up. That's fucked up, bro.
Do you want to end the call now?
I'm kidding. Yeah, no. So Melody Feldman owns CrossFit MPH in like downtown DC. So she's a great trainer, but yeah, that hurts. That changes.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow. Oh man, so awkward now. I don't know what to do. So it was Melody first, but it was right around the same time where I was just like, okay, it's time to go. Like, I just wanted to be around the best trainers that I could possibly be around, and like whatever level that was going to be. For Melody, it was just going and observing, and then with you, we dove way deep into the weeds. And I know we're going to talk about that here first, but right around the turn of the year was January 2018. Reached out to you two first, and that's where I started with that whole progress.
So you have, how many times have you been to our gym? 4, 5?
At least 4 or 5. Yeah, a handful of that.
At least 4 times. So, and I tell people this all the time, like, show up to the gym. And this is now to the point where like, this is what we do for the CDP, where we do, the coach development program that I'm a part of, where I've got a couple people coming in September for a full 3-day immersion. And we're going to do feedback for 3 consecutive days and development. And it's funny because Spencer Hendel talked about this yesterday. So if you haven't listened to the Spencer Hendel podcast, go look at it. But it is a large minority of people that choose to do what you did, what Spencer did, which is, pack up and just literally go wherever it is that is going to facilitate your development. So Spencer talked about he went to Boston. Denise and Austin turned him down, as far as like getting a job. I know multiple other coaches that have done the same thing. And I don't know why more people don't try to go down that road, because I'm actually not aware of anybody that's gone through that path that didn't eventually get there. It's just fun. So what is it that for you that made it okay to just be like, I'm going to go down there and coach in this random dude's gym and
Yeah. Okay. So,
whatever,
first it wasn't like that I was completely fearless in all this. Like I was like shitting myself through a lot of it. Cause I'm like, all right, here's Jason, who I really didn't have a relationship with, who I was asking for your time from so you can develop, a coach that was brand new. So first off is like, I was scared when I had to have that conversation, but I knew like the output of that and like the stuff that I would learn would be so beneficial, not only for myself, but for the people that we actually get to help and we get to coach. And that was more important to me than like not seeking out that opportunity. All right. So why did I get there? Again, I wanted to be around the best trainers that I could possibly be around. But like the whole process through that is I was just like, I'm going to send a Facebook message. He's probably not going to remember me. I don't know if that really matters. And I'm going to go wherever I got to go to be able to develop myself there as a coach. And like I said, like it could have been just observational, me just sitting in a corner with a notebook, because then I still get to see you like do your thing and you can pick up a great progression or a cue or whatever that's going to be. But like for you let me come in there and actually like do a class, which was really, really good. And as far as like coach's development for myself, being uncomfortable in that situation and asking for help from you guys is probably the best decision I've ever made for myself as a trainer and as a coach. Just was.
Now for context, right? It's not like Brandon walked in the gym and I was like, take the 6 a.m.
No.
He was there pretty much all day. I mean, you showed up ass crack. I'm pretty sure you might have showed up for the 6 a.m.
It was 6 a.m. on that first day because I drove down Wednesday, stayed overnight, and then got in there for the 6 a.m. And then it was like 6 a.m. I watched, I observed like 5 classes before I did anything.
So by the end of the day, I don't remember if you asked or I asked you, but at that point we had enough conversations where I was fairly comfortable based on what I knew about you at that point. And like, it's not like I just threw you in there. I was just, I'm literally in the class. Like,
yeah. I mean, you were my shadow the whole time, man. You weren't going anywhere. Everybody was going to be safe. So, yeah.
So talk about that a little bit. If you remember some of the things that you picked up throughout the day, and then walk me through kind of that day, if whatever you remember of it. So you're there. Is it overwhelming? Are you just frantically taking notes? I mean, I remember we talked throughout the day, and then at the end of the day, you're coaching a class. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So the very first thing I ever remember doing was the day before, where you're like, do you know how to write a lesson plan? And I was like, no. And so we spent, which by the way, CrossFit.com has a really great lesson planning certification for that, which I would highly recommend people go out and do if you have no idea how to set up a lesson plan. And if you don't write lesson plans, that's probably going to be your next best opportunity to develop yourself as a coach. So that was the very first thing. I showed up there Wednesday and we're talking about programming. And you're like, can you write a lesson plan? And I was like, man, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so we sat there with a whiteboard. It was probably 20 minutes and we wrote out the timeline and we did everything from general warm up all the way down to the cool down of just a sample. And you use Wednesday's programming. I can't remember what that workout was. And you're like, write a lesson plan when you go home to your hotel tonight and bring it to me at 6 a.m. That was like the first thing. So I probably showed up I don't know, maybe on the half hour, maybe 15 minutes to 6. And that was the first thing that we went through. And I spent a lot of time on that lesson plan and we changed. I don't remember the specifics of it. I can't even remember what that programming is. I think I'm trying to think of what that was that day. I can't remember what it was. I feel like I've gone down. Oh, it was back squats. That's what it was. It was 5x5. And the reason I remember that is because first time I went to Mel's place, 5x5 back squat. And then I went to your place and I'm like, surely the programming will be different. 5x5 back squat, which is really funny in CrossFit programming. So that was the first thing that we ended up doing. And we still picked apart the lesson plan. And
do you remember what we changed about it?
I remember that it didn't leave quite enough time for cool down. I think I left 3 minutes or maybe not any time. I went all the way up to the 60. We reduced that down quite a bit. The general warm-up we didn't do. And I remember in particular, the teaching aspects of it when we got into that. I remember we ripped. I mean, that was completely non-existent. I don't even know if it existed. Right. So we wrote that out where it's okay, we're going to have, we're going to do a circle and we're going to have air squats, on call. We're going to focus on the feet in the first 10 reps. And then on the second, 10 reps, we're going to focus on the knees going out. Right. I remember that was probably the biggest part to it that just like I said, it didn't exist. I just didn't know how to do that at that point. Right. So the cool down for that, we needed to space out a little bit more time or leave some more time at the end for that to be able to be there. It needed to be more specific as far as like, even like taking breaks, right? So like the bathroom, water, whiteboard stuff, limiting like 2 to 3 minutes for that. That wasn't incorporated into that. Warm-up sets before the 5x5. I'm not even sure if that was in there, but you're like, do you want them to be warm before they get on the barbell for the back squat? And I'm like, yeah, probably.
So if we were to do that, if we were to summarize this lesson plan, it would fall in the not so good bucket. But that's pretty standard, right? So it's not that's not like very few people get that even remotely close to being right. And the running joke that I have, with the staff is when people come on and they start getting their first couple of evaluations, I can probably write the evaluation before they do the class and it will be 90% correct. Because I know generally what they're not. Yeah. Well, once you see them enough, you know that like most people don't know what they don't know. So they all make the same mistakes. But that's the good part is like, they're all correctable. Right. So, and that's the value of getting feedback. So you go and you teach the class and then, I think a lot of people don't do this because it's nerve wracking, but like, obviously you're nervous, but do you remember how you felt after like it went down?
Okay. So every single time I go down to your place, I was there last week just for context, and I was working with Cassidy and I was still like really anxious and I know my stuff pretty well after, 1,000 hours of coaching and, 2.5 years of doing this. I'm always nervous when I go down there. The first time, I was really nervous, and I was really nervous before I actually like taught the class. Prior to that, wasn't so bad. When we were going through the lesson plan, I was a little bit nervous as far as that goes, but like everything else was just basically icing on the cake. Like I got to learn so much stuff, as far as that goes. But before I knew I'm going to be evaluated, I get nervous. But then like, as soon as I start to talk, like give the brief and like introduce myself and get names from everybody, like everything calms down quite a bit. The first time there might've been a lot more anxiety just because I was constantly looking up at the clock and like, am I on time with my lesson plan? Am I at the barbell at 22 after the hour? And I don't think I was anywhere close to the times that I was trying to do, but that was the first time working with a lesson plan, working at a new gym with new people as well.
Cool. So then when you leave there and you go back, talk to me a little bit about like how you develop your plan moving forward. So you've gotten this one full day at the box, probably an overwhelming amount of information, and you leave and you go back to the gym. And then what does that look like until the next time you show up?
Yeah. I try to do like big takeaways with stuff. So if you try to focus on, so that first day, I had more information in that one day than maybe like, oh my gosh, like all the other days maybe combined. There was so much information. It was great information that I learned. But if you try to focus on like 20 different things, chances are you're just going to do them all really poorly. So from there, I was really trying to maybe take away like 1 to 3, and I still try to do this with each evaluation that I end up getting and apply that into like the very next day's class. And so the first thing from that first day was there was going to be a lesson plan to everything I ended up writing. And I knew the points as far as like teaching goes that I was going to do. And then besides that, there was a seeing aspect to it that we went over at the end of the day that I really picked up on, because I didn't know how to like look at the room. I think that's something a brand new coach, like they look around, they like maybe call a rep and they try to like take in the whole room, and like you can't see everybody. Like when everybody's moving, you got to focus like one person at a time. But even back then, like I didn't know that. Right. So the seeing thing was, you threw out the whiteboards. We did our little makeshift like circle as far as air squats go. And you're like, okay, when people are not moving, here's where we look at static faults. And then while people are moving, you're looking at one athlete, and that's it. And then you give out cues accordingly. So that was probably the first like 1 to 3 things that I ended up doing. And the actionables from that was just, there's a lesson plan every single day. And I like still write lesson plans every single day, even though I've been coaching, obviously for a decent amount of hours in a decently long time. After that was actually incorporating teaching into that. So instead of spending like, I'm not kidding you, and you probably remember, it was like less than 5 minutes on the actual teaching aspect of it. You know, it was like, I think pretty typical. It was like, all right, here's an air squat, do 10 air squats. And, you know, looks pretty good. And like, that's about it. So flesh that out quite a bit.
That's probably par for the course for most people. They're like, it's a back squat. And I'm like, well, I guess it is, you know, it is what we, for the most part, what would fall in the gross motor skills bucket. However, that doesn't mean that there's nothing to be taught there. You know, there's still a lot of things I want to make sure happen. But most people don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how to break that down to start to teach it in some sort of efficient manner. But if I was going to critique myself, and feel free to jump in here, I'm thinking back on that. And this is probably 2 years ago. And just like everything else, giving feedback is a skill, right? So giving feedback, whether it's to, and there's different levels of feedback. So there's feedback to the athlete, there's feedback to a coach, and then you're going to go one level above that, which is feedback to a coach who's giving feedback, right? And there's different levels to all of that. And if I was to critique myself, and I think I've gotten better at this, is like, it is very, very possible to give people too much information. And that's probably what I did. And I've refined that over the years about how I deliver that, because you can just crush people. And I have crushed people in the past where it's just an overwhelming amount of information, because that's what I got. And there's pros and cons to that.
Sure. Yeah. That first day it was great. There was a lot of information in that first day, and it was like a 12-hour work day. And it was just, and like in between everything in coaching, like we talked about the business, we talked about, I don't know, developing cues and doing all that stuff. We talked about a whole bunch of other crap where we were just kind of like, you know, we were just shooting the shit on the side, and that was incorporated into all that too. So.
Okay. So fast forward. And then I want to talk about the difference. So obviously Brandon, I'm pretty sure it's 4 times. He's been here 4 times over 2 years. So you can call it like roughly once every 6 months, he hits me up and he's like, hey, dude, I want to come down to the gym and I want you to give me both barrels. And so you come down last week, and let's talk about the feedback you got last week, because the feedback we got last week is very different, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's at a different level of minutia of things that we were talking about.
Yeah, it definitely was. So there's a lot of time in between there. You know, I mean, there was probably close to 1,000 hours of coaching in between the first eval and like what I went down and did last week. There was a level 2 development year over the level 2, and a couple evaluations with you guys in between there. So last week, I mean, the big takeaways that we had from that, it was so funny. I told this back to my staff, where like more than anything else was be louder, like over and over and over. And not wrong. I remember Cassidy was like, okay, I'm going to be you for just a second. He goes across the room, and like, I couldn't even hear him. And he's like, that's what you sound like. And I was like, okay, put the big boy voice on. But it was be louder. It was, the second one was addressing the whole room from a macro perspective. Did very, very well in like a one-on-one scenario where I was giving cues to individual athletes, but I would say rarely address the entire room as a whole. We were doing power cleans that day, or hang power cleans. And it was like, if you see the entire room, you know, has a lack of a shoulder shrug, get into the middle of the room and then, you know, yell out there, all right, guys, give me a big shoulder shrug here in this next one, and then watch the room again.
Yeah. So just for context, to kind of pull the curtain back from what Brandon is talking about is this is a very typical process, or a very typical development. So everybody goes through different phases of development and coaching. And so first thing is just like learn the basics, like lesson plan, understand the movements and the faults, and understanding cueing and all that stuff. And then you start to get into a little bit of group management. And then what happens is, once people start getting comfortable with seeing and correcting, then, because it's just the evolution of how it works, is they become very, what we would describe as micro. So that micro is, I work with this specific athlete, right? And if there's 15 people, if there's 15 people in the class, then what inevitably ends up happening is I end up working with all 15 of them in a group setting individually, right? So if you can imagine how this unfolds is, let's say, we were teaching the snatch that day. What was the day? It was power.
No, we did. It was power cleans that day.
It was power clean. So what we were observing is, like, Brandon is seeing and correcting very well, but his efficiency is taking a nosedive because he's having to do all of them in what would be considered a one-on-one environment, right? So, right, the proximity ends up that he's having with an athlete to have an interaction ends up hamstringing him in his effectiveness for the group. So what we started talking about is like, hey, well, you need to be able to have an interaction, but not be in a one-on-one proximity, right? So I need to be able to have an interaction from a distance that is still one-on-one, but not at a one-on-one proximity, meaning like arm's length away. Because every time I do that, I have to cover distance. Distance is time. We all know that. Force inches over time, just to nerd out. But those are the things we start to iron out. It's like, hey, just make that cue from over here, right? Like you can talk to that person. And this is where Cassidy was going with the, you need to be louder, which is like, I can still have those one-on-one interactions. I just don't have to be standing next to you to do that.
Yeah.
So now it's like managing the micro group or the micro athlete with the macro group while not losing people's attention in there, just to kind of unpack what Brandon's talking about. And like I said, it's a very natural evolution. Like people end up doing that because they're like, I got to make this correction. This needs to happen. So then once we've established that they know that, I'm like, okay, now I need to pull you out and we need to zoom out a little bit because there's 14 other people here. So how do I get one-on-one interaction minus the one-on-one proximity?
Yeah, that was just going into like the middle of the room and being like, hey, Jason, you know, when you're pulling up on your barbell, like give me a shrug. And that's like from across the room, right? And what ends up happening at that point, you guys made a great point to this, is like, you know, Brandon, who's standing next to Jason, all of a sudden is shrugging his shoulders. And then like there could be in that's like a multiplication factor of like however many people are in your room. So you might have just given one cue, but like fixed like 10 different people, right?
Yeah. And so again, there's just an evolution of coaching as far as like, okay, I have the skill set to see and correct movement, but now how do I maximize my efficiency as the number of athletes increases? And all that means is I have to be able to do things from a distance. I have to be able to work here and there simultaneously via either a visual and a tactile or a visual and a verbal cue. So that was some of the things. And then I think one of the other things we worked on, which is common too, because it's not your gym, is just like, hey, be aware of your visual line of sight on athletes.
Yeah, we did. And you got a unique setup there at the gym. Like that would never, like we talked about this, like it would never happen at my gym just because the way that it's ended up setting up, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. And like my goal in the end is to not only coach at my gym. Right. So that was fantastic.
So just again, for context. So Brandon, y'all's gym is a rectangle, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
so
can stand on one side of the room, see everybody.
Yeah. So ours is a little bit different. So there's a dog leg in there. I'm trying to think, there's a couple other different gyms, like New England is kind of like that. It's just a small.
Yeah. I've been in there. Yeah.
But same type of dog leg. And so if you're standing in one particular corner, which in our gym is like, you can't see around the corner, which there could be 5 athletes over there. And that was one of the things we talked about afterwards too, is like, hey, you need to be aware. It's not that you can't go to the corner, but you need to be aware that if you're there, there's certain things you can't see. But what's also just as important is the athletes can't see you. So now they're bored and now they're off like dicking around doing something else or not paying attention. So like them being able to see you is just important as you being able to see them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, just a quick question for you there, Fern. I mean, one of the things that we talked about, gosh, it might've even been on day one, cause I think I got caught like in the middle of the air squat circle. And so like with that, cause you were basically like, hey, like be in the center of the room so that people can see you at that point. But like your back is turned to like other athletes that are within the gym. So like, how do you balance that to make sure you can like see the entire room, but like make sure that you're in enough proximity to be able to like get people to see you so that your presence is seen there?
Yeah. So it's impossible to not have your back to people at any given point. And I think the only difference is having awareness that your back is to people versus not. Right? So there's a difference between I'm fully aware that there's athletes behind me and I'm going to move in a manner that allows me to get them in certain intervals versus somebody who just has their back turned for 3 minutes because they've just forgotten about athletes that are behind them, or that they're standing in the corner and they're just fully not aware that they don't have eyes on athletes over here. So I don't think it's this scenario where like you can never turn your back to people. It's just simply being aware that, hey, I am now cannot see a certain population of athletes in my gym and I need to get out of this position as quickly as possible. So I like to refer to it as visual advantage. Like I'm just constantly moving to get visual advantage. And I think that's how you solve that, is like, it sounds really dumb, but just simply being aware that I am at a visual disadvantage and have to move away from that, right? It'd be the same thing if you were teaching any sort of like like if guys in the military or law enforcement, it's like weapons and tactics. It's like, hey, I need to have a visual advantage, like whether it's high ground or something like that. But like the more I can see, the better. So I'm constantly trying to put myself in a position or scenario where I can see the most. And then if I do have to put myself at a visual advantage, the only thing I just need to be aware of is it needs to be for a minimal amount of time, right? So like, because again, if they can't see me or they realize that my back is to them, there's something that happens in an athlete's mind, which is they're not paying attention to me. And now I check out. So it's just that whole process of simply being aware that is occurring and then moving in order to facilitate or correct that. So that would be my answer.
I got you. Okay.
So you can critique me here. So in that whole process, what has been your feelings as far as like the feedback, right? So like, has it been good? Has it been bad? What did you find more or less beneficial?
Yeah. Overall, again, best thing that I've ever done for myself as far as coaching was seeking out somebody who is much better, much smarter than I was, and picking their brain for an entire day. Day one, if we could have like came up with like top 1 to 3 things of like, here's where your focus need to be. And I think day two, like I went back right before the L2 and you gave me an evaluation and you did that time where you're like, hey, and it was the teaching thing. Like, again, it wasn't very long. And you're like, your biggest opportunity, to get an advantage here is to like really break out your teaching, and you should be able to teach, the deadlift for 20 minutes or whatever it was. But that day one was like, there was so much information in that, man. It was just taking like the top, like 1 to 3 things of like, hey, this is where you have your best opportunity to get better as far as that goes.
I think, again, I would agree with that criticism. I think it's valid and correct. And so, and this is what I've done now. And this is what I've been working with Cassidy on, because, and again, it's an evolution, right? And that is part of the process. One of the first things you do when you start giving feedback is, I don't know anybody that doesn't go through this, is you give too much information, right? Like, yeah. So then you have to taper the delivery of that information. So now how I go about, depending on the environment is first have the person give you their own feedback, right? Ask them how it went. Most often what I find is that people are pretty accurate with their own feedback. Like they're fairly aware, which just allows me, it opens up the door for me to talk about it as well. It just makes it a little bit more comfortable. And I can say I either agree or I can say I disagree. And I'm like, I actually think you did pretty well there. Here's where I think some other things that we could work on. But now what I do is there's 2 processes happening at the same time. So as I'm gathering information on as far as giving feedback, I will collect everything in written form. And then, but that's not what I'm going to give you now, right? So what I'm going to do is so for those of you who are trying to give feedback to your coaches, here's a way to do it. Again, not the way. I will just start writing, and I will literally write down every single thing that I observe, where they're standing, what they're saying, how many athletes they interact with, like different types of cues they use, were they on time? And I'll just write it all down, and it looks like trash on paper because there's got to be so much going into that. Well, yeah, and there's not a real way to organize that real time, right? So where I think the art and the skill of that comes with consolidating it and then delivering it fairly quickly afterwards. But in the meantime, it's everything, right? But you don't want to give everything. So the way I do it now is far more organized. So I write down everything, and then what I'll do is I kind of recap it. And then what I like to do is put it into one of 6 buckets, right? And those 6 buckets fall into the 6 criteria that we would use for evaluating a coach: it's teaching, seeing, and correcting, group management, presence and attitude, and demonstration. And I'll take the 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that I have a common theme on, and it'll go in one of those 2 buckets. So the person largely has a problem with group management based on all the notes that I've taken. I'm like, okay, that's bucket number 1. This is the first primary piece of information that they need to walk away with here. And the other one might be teaching. So I look at that and I'm like, hey, okay, here's the 2 things we need to focus on: group management and teaching. Everything else, it's for you to look at later, but here's the takeaway. I want you to work on these things. Here's 1 to 2 things that are actionable on these 2 big ticket items that you can now go home and work on. And that I have found is far better received, and it allows people to take action on it much, much faster. And that was simply because I was shitty at giving feedback, you know? So that too is a process, but that's how you can start to pack it up. And I just want to make it super objective. And I'm like, okay, well, we're evaluating them on 6 things. My feedback should only fall within those 6 things currently. And that's the way I've found it to be far more valuable these days and much better received. You know, like try to leave opinions out of it. Be like, well, you know, I think you should do it this way. Like that shit doesn't matter. Like that's just your opinion. Like what can this person walk away with right now? And how do I give them the 2 big ticket items that it will help them improve based on this feedback, what they have the biggest faults with regard to their coaching. So I don't know if that's what you walked away with this time, but that's usually the goal now.
Yeah, I mean, ever since, the one with the L2, it was very specific. It was like, focus on teaching. Like, this is where you got to get better. The first time, like, again, we spent 12 hours together, and I had, oh my gosh, I had so many pages of notes that day. And again, it was super beneficial, but a little overwhelming when you talk about how much information we actually, transcended and did. Question for you, Fern, is like, so like out of the 6, like coaching criteria for, let's say, this is one of the questions that I had, and we're just kind of on this topic right now, is like going into the L2, where is like the biggest like lack of experience, or maybe stuff that like coaches are the worst at as far as the 6 coaching criteria go for somebody that's going into the L2?
Yeah, the L2 is generally, in my opinion, falls into the teaching and the seeing and correcting. So like I put seeing and correcting in one bucket. They're separate skills, but you can't do one without the other for the most part. I think most people could come up with a decent correction, but the vast majority of people overteach, and the vast majority of people don't see very well. And because both of those just take reps. Like you have to be a terrible teacher before you're an okay teacher, and you have to be an okay teacher before you're a good teacher, and then vice versa before you get really good. So
yeah,
most people just really, really overteach things instead of just keeping it extremely simple. And then most people just don't have enough reps on their eyeballs to see quickly enough to make that correction right then and there. So those are the 2 big ticket items. And the level 2 is it is on purpose a contrived environment. So there's not a ton of, there is minimal group management when you have the small groups, when you teach 5 people, but most people don't get into the full blown group management like we would do in the coach development program, where like you're going to have to manage a full class. That's a lot for most people. Most people don't do it very well. Yeah. So I would say the teaching and then the seeing probably, and most people, the teaching is they just literally don't do their homework. They don't know the.
Yeah. I mean, that was my follow-up question was like what drills, what would you suggest to somebody who's going to approach that to make sure that they got their teaching and their seeing down?
I mean, it's nothing sexy. We've already talked about it on the podcast, and I'm pretty sure I sent you home with that homework when you left the first time, which is like, hey, if you don't know the progressions, like just start there. Like it's not sexy, there's no like, magic rhino tusk, juice that is that you're going to do that. Like it's literally the nerdy stuff of like, write them down again, write them down faster, cause like, it's just not where you want to be spending mental resources, is like trying to figure out what the hell the points performance for the squat are. I just need to know those. So once you've gotten that out of the way, now you can take action on those items because they're going to pop out to you. So that's like the biggest deficiency. And then once you've got that knowledge, now you can start working on the art of coaching, which is the delivery and your interaction with athletes and how that works. So, it takes a lot of work on the front end, which is not fun or cool, but that's where I tell everybody to start. Like if you don't know the faults in the points performance and the progressions, start there. You'll be significantly better served simply by having that information readily available.
Cool.
So if you're one of the listeners and you have another question for me, what would it be? Or Ackerman or Todd? I'll speak for both of them.
Oh man, you sound a little bit better than those guys for what it's worth.
Yeah, but that's why you
very big.
You still called Mel before you called me.
You're not going to let that go, are you?
No, never.
Very, very big radio voice, man.
No.
Man.
Cool, man. Well, listen, I wanted to get on this because I thought this would be super beneficial for a lot of listeners, because I think it's important for people to hear from somebody like you who, you know, not to say that I'm not on the journey, because I am absolutely on the journey with you, but people who kind of fall a little bit more in your experience level, where they're just like, hey, I'm in the gym, I'm trying to get better, I'm trying to be more proficient, and understand that, like, yeah, it's a lot of work. Like, that's just all it is, you know, and it's like finding feedback. And like, again, if you haven't listened to the episode with Spencer and now with Brandon, like, seek out help and go there and get help. Don't just sit in your gym and think that it's going to get better or you're going to get better. You know, you're generally the big fish in that small pond, and that's not where you want to be. Yep,
absolutely, man. So this is good. To the newer coaches that go out there, is like, you know, be okay being uncomfortable as well. Like you said it really well. Go ask for help. Surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and who are better than you, because it's just going to make you a better coach. And if you have aspirations of, like, you know, getting on seminar staff, or, you know, doing anything like that, or working strength conditioning program like that, like, you're going to need to work those reps with somebody who's just much, much better than you.
For sure. All right. 2 questions.
Yeah.
Recent book that you've read, anyone that you recommend? I know you're a reader.
Yeah, quite a few. So I've read, oh my gosh, what was it called? I'm blanking on it. How Bad Do You Want It? Matt. I'm blanking on the last name as far as that goes.
Okay. I'll get that. Sounds like a mindset book. Is that what that is?
Very, very much was a mindset book.
Okay.
Which was very good. It has to do a lot of, like, you know, behind the psychobiological stuff of, like, in your mind, as far as, like, you know, cardiovascular endurance and everything like that goes. Very, very good. Other stuff that I've listened to as far as, like, media goes, like Best Hour of Their Day. If you're looking to develop your coach's stuff, like, I would be listening to that almost every single day. And it's not just a plug because we're on here right now. It really is beneficial. I love the air squat and the deadlift probably more than any other episode, where you guys just dived into that. And I've coached those movements hundreds of times and got so much stuff out of just listening to those 2 again.
Cool. And then last question. This is a new one. I have yet to ask this one yet, but
bring it on, man.
It is now my question for every guest that I interview on here is, what have you failed at recently?
Oh man, we gotta like talk about stuff on the negative here that I failed at.
Well, I'm gonna life coach you now, because it's not talking about the negative.
Okay, here we go. All right.
So there's a difference between failing and being a failure, right? So,
okay.
So what have you failed at? Because then this is what I'm trying to do, is like identify those failures and then unpack them for lessons learned, right? So, like, because you're going to fail. So, because this is something I get super worried about with my kids. Like, I don't want them to be, you know, in today's society, like, afraid of failure. So we're going to talk about it a lot with my kids. Be like, hey, what'd you fail at today? Like, it's cool if you fail. Just don't be a failure.
Yeah. Just pick it up and keep going. That's what have I failed at recently? Tough question. That was not something I expected to be like
curveball, bro.
You haven't done. Yeah, no kidding.
That's what we do here on the Best Hour of Our Day, making you uncomfortable, bro.
Yeah, and typically I'm okay with that. Something that I failed at recently. Gosh, I'm not even close to perfect as far as that goes. Gosh, man. Man, I'll get personal. I'll leave it outside of the gym as far as that goes. Really,
it doesn't have to be coaching related.
Yeah. So I try to live and die by my calendar, which is just budgeting my time throughout the day. And every week, I put in time to, like, talk to my family. My family all lives in Michigan. They're 500 miles away. And man, I haven't made a single one of those phone calls in, it's been a long time, dude. It's been a long time. So, like, every time when that actionable comes up and, like, the reminder comes up on a Tuesday night where it's like, call Kyle, haven't done that in a while, man. And that's not good.
I can empathize with that. That's something I'm not good at either. So
yeah,
I get it. That's but now we can come up with action items to correct that, my friend.
Okay.
There you go, bro. All right, everybody. That's all we got for you today. Big things, takeaways. Like, seek out, somebody who's going to help you out with coaching. We all do it. I do it. Brandon's doing it. All the coaches that we have on the show, they've all done it. It's the only way you're going to get better. But if you guys have questions about anything we talked about with regard to development, all that stuff, let me know, and we will get those answered for you. But Brandon, thanks for your time, brother. I know you're busy running a gym, so I will let you get back to that.
Dude, it was cool jamming with you as normal, man. Thanks for having me, Fern. Appreciate it.
All right, brother. See ya.
All right, see you later.
Thanks for listening to Best Hour of Their Day. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. How cool is that? There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer, so it becomes super simple. Some of these episodes with Fern or Todd or myself chatting with one another, we've done right within the app itself. Anchor will make it easy to distribute your podcast to all platforms, Spotify, Apple, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make an awesome podcast in one place. All you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Come on, who doesn't have Spotify at this point? And if you were unaware, Spotify now is offering podcasts. That's right. On Spotify, you can listen to all your favorite artists, but also podcasts in one place for free. Spotify has a huge catalog of podcasts on every topic, including the one you're listening to right now, Best Hour of Their Day. On Spotify, you can follow your favorite podcasts so you never miss an episode. Premium users can even download episodes to listen to offline wherever you are, something I always do before I hop on a plane. And you can even easily share what you're listening to with your friends on Instagram and other social media platforms. Here's the deal. If you haven't done so already, be sure to download the Spotify app, search for Best Hour of Their Day on Spotify, or browse some other podcasts if you want. You can find them in your library tab. And also make sure to follow me so you never miss an episode of Best Hour of Their Day. Thanks again for listening to Best Hour of Their Day. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, one more time, please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and send us any feedback you have to @besthouroftheirday on Instagram and besthouroftheirday@gmail.com if you want to shoot us an email. We appreciate you. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.